Medical training is tough. The nights, weekends, on-calls, long days, exams, moving around the country, change in identity, lost time with friends and family, witnessing death, life, and everything in between. I could go on, but in summary, it has not been an easy ride. If you're new here, my name is Catherine and I am a junior doctor and GP trainee in London. In this vlog, I will be sharing my experiences and techniques about how I cope, or attempt to cope with medical training. Come along to see a week in the life of self-care as a junior doctor. The biggest thing I've learned about coping is that it does not imply success, but rather effort. It is a conscious activity, and much like any skill, it requires practice and commitment. There are two main coping methods: problem-focused and emotion-focused. Problem-focused coping strategies are largely behavioural and reduce or eliminate stressors. In this instance, the individual has the power to change things, for example, reducing the number of hours worked. Emotion-focused coping strategies use emotional regulation to minimize the distress from stressors, for example, exercise, mindfulness, and emotional support. In this video, I'll be concentrating on these two coping methods. However, there is a third category, which is avoidance and disengagement. For example, removing oneself from the situation, using alcohol, denial, and wishful thinking. Evidently, this is less healthy than the first two coping mechanisms and can lead to further problems down the line. It's just past 5 p.m. and it's almost the end of the day. I've just got a couple of admin things to do and then I will be heading home. The start and the end of the working day and entering and leaving the workplace, I think, is a very important time mentally and also physically to think about how to set boundaries at work. I've definitely not been very good at this in the past. I'm still not perfect at it by any means. In my first year as a doctor, I actually lived in hospital accommodation, and the accommodation was right next to the hospital. So I'd go from waking up, going in at 7 a.m. for my surgical job, and then coming home at 5-6 p.m. if I had a good day. Sometimes we obviously would have to stay late if there's a sick patient on the ward. I would sort of walk my 100 meters, I'd walk that 50 meters into my accommodation, and I'd never really felt like mentally or physically I ever left the hospital. That I found really, really tough because it felt like it consumed me wholly. Eventually I found other ways to sort of set mental boundaries from the hospital and the hospital accommodation, but this took a lot of time, and I think especially when you start off as a doctor, it becomes so much of your identity. You know, there's so much hype around graduation and getting a job, and I'm sure, you know, friends and family are like, oh my god, you're an actual doctor, you know. It's easy to be completely consumed by this identity. But as, you know, years have gone on, I have become a bit better with sort of setting boundaries. After I shut down and I've done all my paperwork and I've discussed all the cases that I needed to, then mentally I just try and switch off. Inevitably, sometimes with sort of more difficult cases, more challenging cases, patients undoubtedly stick in your mind, but I try to adopt other techniques to not get myself consumed by it. Meditation and mindfulness looks very different for everyone. You don't have to be sat in a lotus position meditating under a tree. For me, going for a swim, going for a walk in the park without my phone, pottery, anything that is immersive, I find is really beneficial. The other thing that I think that really helps is cycling. Being on my bike, it is hard to think about anything else, especially if you're cycling in London. You have to be so observant about everything around you, you know, the cars, the taxis, the buses, the pedestrians. It's a sort of ritual that I have and I'm very lucky to be able to do. It sets a physical boundary and a sort of like a buffer zone to transition from work me to home me. I will never forget a piece of advice my educational supervisor in F1 gave me, which is to organise hard stop commitments after work. Whether it is booking an exercise class, dinner with a friend, or like today, going to a pottery class, it made me laser focused on prioritising my work effectively in order to leave on time. I learned to concentrate on the jobs that were urgent and truly needed to be done on the day. With time, I became increasingly efficient and eventually realised that often, jobs could actually wait until later rather than require me to stay late. Evidently, sick patients on the ward meant I occasionally left late, but this was an exception rather than the norm. I was also lucky enough to have supportive seniors who would often help us prioritise to ensure we left on time. They would ask, must this be done today? Can it wait until tomorrow? Or can we hand it over to the on-call team? Handing over effectively and appropriately was also very much a skill developed over the years that has greatly helped with creating healthy boundaries during hospital training. In medicine, especially in a pressured system, the workload is endless and infinite. This makes creating a problem-based coping strategy to enforce boundaries like leaving on time and handing over essential, and ultimately protect one from burnout. So I've just finished my morning clinic, and the great thing about being in training and being a GP trainee is that you get a debrief. What this involves is that I go to my trainer and I talk through every single one of my cases that I've seen. To talk through things that I wasn't really sure about in terms of next steps in management, or a difficult patient encounter, or just to share the sort of the cognitive load and the uncertainty that we deal with in general practice. And actually today, when I was debriefing with my trainer, we ended up having a really good conversation that was very applicable to everything that I'm sort of going to be talking about in this video. We talked about decision fatigue, emotional load, how we sustain ourselves in medicine, the importance of setting boundaries, how we try to separate our medical identity with our identity outside of work. We also touched on the importance today in the debrief about sharing uncertainty, because general practice is really isolating. As a full-time GP, you might be having sort of 18 to 20 patient encounters in a single morning or afternoon, and that is a huge cognitive burden. And on top of seeing the patients, you have to go through blood tests, documents from the hospital, patient letters, and so on. I can only see the workload getting higher and higher. I'm sure if you live in the UK, you would know that general practice is in a crisis. We don't have enough GPs, and there's a lot more work that we need to be doing. It's so important to share and really to sort of put our experiences in the context of others and in the context of the current situation. So now I'm going to have a bit of lunch, and in the afternoon we have our VTS, which is our GP training scheme. We meet up with all the other trainees, and we're going to have a session today, I think, about life after VTS, which I think will be great because I'm not really sure what my life is going to be like after GP training. And then after that, we have something called a Ballant group. A Ballant group is basically a chance for us to get together as trainees and talk about difficult cases, not necessarily the medical aspects of things. It's more talking about how the doctor-patient relationship impacts us emotionally. Meeting up and seeing the other trainees, talking about our experiences, talking about difficult patient encounters. It is really essential for coping in medicine. I think that everyone should have an opportunity to do this. I know that in the hospital I had less opportunity to do that compared to in the GP setting, especially with being part of a larger GP training scheme. You really have that peer support available to you. Friday is my less than full-time day, which means it is protected time to concentrate on Topple Digital Health Fellowship work. I often start the day with some movement, in this case, doing a yoga class. Exercise has been an incredibly important emotion-based coping strategy for me. During hospital rotations, I often had no motivation to exercise at home and would book classes on ClassPass. Signing up to a class and avoiding the cancellation fee was a good enough reason to turn up, and I'd always feel better for it. Starting less than full-time training recently is a problem-based coping strategy which has done wonders for my well-being. The Topple Fellowship has allowed me to focus on a topic away from purely clinical medicine and provided time and space to ponder about large-scale changes I can make to innovate and improve patient care. Today I am catching up on a machine learning course which comprises one of the components of the fellowship.
How much does the data vary? So here you can see that
I then had the pleasure to speak to one of the subscribers to this channel, Percy. Filming at the moment is all about like how to preserve a non-medical and a medical identity and like coping strategies.
I learn a lot from it because everything is obviously new to me. And
Yeah. Thank you, Percy, for reaching out, sharing your insights and for your support. I had never really thought that my channel would appeal to lay, non-medical individuals, and viewers would mainly be medical students, junior doctors, or healthcare professionals. But I guess that's the beauty of YouTube. I'd actually love to know whether you're medical or non-medical yourself, so let me know down in the comments below. I always try and plan something to look forward to on the weekends, which often gives me that extra bit of motivation to get through the week. Related to this, I also ensure that I take all of my annual leave. In hospital rotations, I request it early and plan it strategically, for example next to 0 days or bank holidays to maximise the amount of time off. On my most recent trip you can see here, I went glamping in Pembrokeshire, which is on the coast of Wales. It was absolutely stunning, and I was lucky enough to see some puffins. Last but not least, if you feel that you are not coping, there is always help available, whether it is through supervisors, program directors, occupational health, or your GP. There are additionally support services specifically tailored for doctors, for example the Practitioner Health Programme and Doc Health, both of which I have used and gained immense value from. Even with the best coping strategies, medicine is a physically, intellectually, and emotionally demanding career, and doctors are human with needs and emotions as anyone else. On that note, I hope that this video has given you a framework to think about coping strategies and perhaps some ideas to adopt yourself. Whether you're a medic or a non-medic, I'd love to hear about what you do to cope with your work or life in general, so let me know down in the comments below. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!